everybody. I'm Evie Roberts, and this is my podcast, Talking in the Dark. Welcome. The aim of this podcast is to raise awareness about blindness, visual impairment, and disability in general, in a happy and light-hearted way. For those of you that don't know, I am blind. I was born with a condition called bilateral anophthalmia. Try spelling that one. It basically means that when I was born, my eyes didn't develop properly, so I wear prosthetics instead. The goal of this podcast is to remove some of the stigma and stereotypes around disabilities, whilst also having fun at the same time. Each week, I will be interviewing people from all walks of life, including some with hidden or physical disabilities like mine, and getting to know a little bit more about them and the lives they lead. In this episode, I am very excited to tell you that I will be talking to Paralympian and sports presenter James Roberts. My name is Evie Roberts, and this is my podcast, Talking in the Dark. Welcome. Hi James, how are you doing?
I'm very good, Evie. How are you?
Yeah, really good, thank you. Well, first of all, it is an absolute honour to have you on the podcast. I'm super excited to talk to you. You're such an amazing person, and I'm super excited to kind of hear your story in more detail. But second of all, how's your day going so far?
Day's going really well. I'm really glad to be part of this podcast. But yeah, really busy. I'm project managing a couple of jobs that are on site at the moment, so a little bit busy. But it's the evening, so relax and have a chat with you. Should be interesting.
Oh, great! That sounds really exciting. So obviously, project managing, is that something that you really enjoy?
Yeah, so I'm an architect by trade, but I've got more into the project management, and we've got a couple of big school schemes on site at the moment. So just making sure everything's running smoothly for all the guys that are on the building site.
Oh, well, that sounds amazing. So obviously, yeah, I know that you studied like architecture at university, and I know that that was something you kind of then went into by trade after sort of retiring from doing wheelchair rugby full time, which is something we're going to get into. But what made you want to study architecture?
So I grew up in construction. My dad owns a construction firm, and we were sort of taken to building sites from a very early age. I worked all summer holidays on building sites and very quickly realised that I didn't want to work out in the pouring rain in the middle of winter. So the next best thing was drawing the buildings for other people to build. So that's where I sort of found my little niche and really enjoyed it. Yeah, and you rightly say I've sort of gone back to it after I finished with wheelchair rugby, but it was a nice transition actually.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially if you had already, you already knew the trade before going into wheelchair rugby. I would imagine that it wasn't too big of a transition between the two disciplines.
No, so I lost, or the team lost funding after the Rio 2016 games, and I actually then got back into architecture, working for a firm in London, working part time, but they were amazing. Let me off time to train and sort of competition. So yeah, that transition from athlete into full professional working life was a lot smoother than I know it can be for a lot of athletes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So obviously we've mentioned that you play wheelchair rugby, and that's something that we're definitely going to get in later. But I know that your disability isn't one that you were born with, but it was instead the result of an illness. So can you tell me a little bit about your life before you became ill?
Yeah, no, very regular upbringing, I think, or normal as I can say. I was kid going to university, just started my first year, done school, everything that everyone else, very sporty, very active. I played university rugby. I played rugby for school before that. And then I contracted bacterial meningitis in the very first week of my summer holidays after my first year at university. So it was a really big life changing sort of moment.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. And I mean, you mentioned there that you were kind of very, very sporty, very active as a kid, and you took part in a lot of sport. You know, what do you think kind of got you into sport? Was it something that your family were your family very active, or, did you just kind of fall into it?
So I put it all down to the school that I went to. So I'm very competitive by nature. Me and my brother, very close in age, really sort of competed with each other on everything. But I was lucky enough to go to a school, Christ College Brecon, and they really emphasised sort of team sports, getting all the pupils really active and enjoying sports, and that really sort of led into later years. I enjoyed all sports that I've played, and yeah, put a lot of my love for sport down to being in such an amazing school.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, like if the people around you are as passionate about something as you are, I think it makes it more enjoyable because there's that sort of shared love for it.
It really does. I think we played rugby pretty much every spare minute we got, in break times and things like that, and all the guys that I was in school with did the same. So it was, yeah, like you said, having those guys around you really sort of passionate about it really helped sort of that environment.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously you mentioned, you were at uni, life was going well, and then first week of your summer holidays, you contracted bacterial meningitis. So can you tell me a little bit about that and your sort of hospital journey that followed?
Yeah. Obviously, meningitis is something that I guess most people in the UK have or haven't heard of. It's one of those illnesses that most people got vaccinated for certain strains, especially my age group did. Unfortunately, the strain that I got, I was not vaccinated against. So I think it was a sort of a Wednesday night, middle of the week. I was working for my dad's firm. I'd come back from university, so I was making up some money so I could go back to university for the next year. But I was working on a young farmers project. We were building a float for a local fair. Um, Finished up with that. Went to the pub for just one because I knew I'd work the next day. Um, Went home, and in the middle of the night, just started feeling really ill. To the point where I had to get up. I was being sick. I was headache, really sore all over. And Dad came in the morning, woke me up for work, and said, "Oh, come on, we got to go." I said, "Oh, I feel really rough. You're gonna have to take me to hospital." Him knowing that I'd been to the pub the night before, thought it was a hangover, and said, "I'll come down to work when you're feeling a bit better." I didn't end up feeling any better. I think I managed to get downstairs a couple hours later, and housekeeper, friend of the family at the time, managed. She was there, and she said, "Oh, something's not right here," and she immediately took me to the GPs. Um, they said I had the flu and that I should go home. So on the way home, I apparently passed out. So she decided to then continue past the house and go straight to the hospital, where they again proceed to say, "No, it's the flu. You should go home." And then I passed out again, by which time they've got, "Oh, this perhaps isn't the flu. We should look into this a little bit more." I think it was a couple hours later before, to what I believe was a student doctor, identified and said, "What is this? Maybe meningitis?" Um, and then I was basically in a coma for 10 days, recovering from the effects. Unfortunately, the physical effects were a lot more longer lasting, and I ended up spending a total of 2.5 years in hospital, recovering, getting to a point where I'd able to be independent and get back out there again. So, yeah, really savage illness that more people need to be made aware of. Not an enjoyable one at all, and I would not wish it on anyone.
God, yeah, I mean, just listening to you sort of talk about that, and it's, sort of scary to think how quickly it came on. You woke up in the middle of the night and felt rough, and almost a day later you were in hospital, and they kind of said, it's meningitis, and then 2.5 years in hospital. I mean, it must have been. I mean, it's scary how quickly it sort of all came on, and then obviously. I can't even imagine how scary that must have been for you at the time. I mean, I'm guessing you probably can't remember much about how you were feeling in the initial stages, but from a mental health perspective, how was that sort of hospital journey for you, mental health? What emotions were you kind of feeling?
It was really difficult. Not going to lie, and to the point where I think I'd actually disassociated myself right at the start of it. I thought this was happening to somebody else. Really, really quite weird experiences. All the drugs that they put you on to keep you in an induced coma are quite hallucinogenic. So definitely had some weird dreams, and definitely suffered with a little bit of depression while I was in hospital. It definitely took a long time to sort of come out of that. I'd like to think that I've completely beaten that now, and I'm a sort of very forward focused person, and will try and get on with what's next rather than dwelling too much on the past. But at the time, it was a tough time in hospital. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's that's completely understandable. I mean, your life kind of took a complete 180. But I'm wondering, did you know much about, meningitis beforehand, or was it a real sort of shock?
It was a massive shock. Yeah. It so you sort of wake up and someone said, "Oh yeah, I had this idea that I was just going to walk out of hospital, and I was just going to spend a couple of weeks in bed and be okay." But the longer lasting effects and sort of the amputations and all that comes with it, it's earth shattering. But I've met people that have been in a lot worse situation for meningitis than myself, and a lot better situation. It really depends on how quickly you're able to treat the illness um, from a start. So yeah, a couple hours either here or there, and I could be a lot worse or I could be a lot better. I'm just very lucky that I'm in the position I am.
Yeah, I mean, sort of you mentioned amputations there, and I know that you are a double amputee, but obviously, how quickly did all of that happen? Was it very quick that they made the decision that that was something that needed to be done, or was it all kind of over quite a long period of time?
Yeah, I think looking back now, it probably should have been over a shorter period of time, but it was sort of a drawn out process. They wanted to see what damage had been done, what was salvageable. So 6 months, I think, was sort of the time between contracting meningitis and then having the amputations. If they'd done the amputation sooner, it might have been possible that they'd have amputated more of my fingers as well. So I don't have regrets from the way that it did transpire, but at the same time, it was that 6 month period of not really knowing what the outcomes were going to be that are quite difficult, and that's probably led to some of the issues that I've got now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm guessing that kind of that period of unknown where you kind of knew things were going to be difficult, but you didn't really know. I guess you didn't really know what was going to happen. I'd imagine that was quite scary because I think one of the biggest fears is sort of fear of the unknown when you feel like you're not in control.
Yeah, and I think that was the time where I was most disassociated. I was very much going through the motions. I tell people I was in hospital for 2.5 years, but I now can refer to it as something like COVID, where everyone was doing the same thing over and over, and there's nothing really that stands out to make that long period of time memorable. So it was very, while I know 2.5 years was a long time, it didn't feel, looking back at it now, like that was a long time.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's completely sort of understandable. But obviously, there's a big sort of transition in coming to terms with and learning to live with a
Of course.
disability. So, can you tell me, about that sort of transition process?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I came from a slightly different background. My mum had multiple sclerosis since I was born, so I knew of the challenges of someone being in a wheelchair and what disability sort of meant. So I think by the time I came out of hospital, I'd very much come to the terms with I'm going to be using a wheelchair, and I need to be sort of working towards other goals and sort of making the best of what I've got. Like I say, I'm not one that really sort of dwells on the past, but finding something like wheelchair rugby, and meeting other people in chairs and other people with disabilities, and sort of seeing that actually, you know what, this isn't that bad. There are plenty of people that have it a lot worse, a lot better, and how are they managing and how are they coping? And you learn tricks and you learn ways to cope, physically, and ways to do things for yourself to make yourself more independent. And that all of that process has really helped me in definitely the first 5 years since leaving hospital, I guess.
Yeah, I can I would imagine that that definitely would help, meeting other people who are in the same situation as you, and kind of doing the same things as you. I was going to ask you actually, if you had any sort of preconceptions about what living with a disability would be like, but you mentioned that your mum had multiple sclerosis. So I would imagine, did that give you some idea of what things might be like for yourself living with a disability?
Yeah, and it definitely hardened my resolve. I mean, something that I'd never want, and it's probably my biggest fear now, is that I don't want to be a burden on anybody that is close to me, or family or friends or anything like that. So I've really worked hard to be as fully independent and want to do everything that I can myself. And I think that comes from sort of living with someone that had a disability when I was growing up, and seeing what effects it can have on the family. So yeah, that's it. I definitely had some preconceived ideas. They were probably quite narrow compared to now, like going out and meeting other people, especially going to something like Paralympic Games, where you just meet. So there's so many different types of disability out there that you sort of get a better understanding of what people need, and what people want from their lives, and how people are coping. Whereas when I first sort of was in a chair, it was very much that was my very sort of isolated idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can totally understand why you would have such kind of, in your words, sort of narrow conceptions and preconceived ideas about, what having a disability might be like. Do you think that living with someone who also has a disability, do you think it helped slightly and, sort of gave you some idea of what you might expect?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think things like accessibility to just general wheelchair, car use, all of the stuff that able-bodied or non-disabled take for granted in terms of like walking around and on all of that. It definitely had a much better idea of that going into it, in terms of not getting frustrated, as I think I know other people have when they're suddenly put in a position where they need to use a wheelchair. It's something that I see a lot, is people get frustrated not being able to do, but because I had the idea of knowing what my mum could and couldn't do, then it sort of helped me in that sense.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, another question I was going to ask you was kind of like, did it shock you how many sort of accessibility barriers that there can be? But, I would imagine that obviously, like you say, you kind of knew what to expect a little bit. Do you think there were still some things that did shock you, or did you kind of really know, what was basically going to happen?
That's a good question. I think it shocks me when people, I guess, bring up excuses why it couldn't or shouldn't be made accessible, especially where like being involved in construction and architecture. You come up against a lot of people who go, "Oh, it's a listed building. Oh, we don't need to do that. We don't need to do this." And I'm like, "Well, actually, we really should be trying to make the world more inclusive. Whether that just be access ramps, or look, a path for sight disabilities, hard of hearing, and anything to make the world more accessible." And I spent a couple of years living in America, where they are so much further ahead in terms of like building accessibility, and that is probably down to it being a newer country, and buildings not being as old. But at the same time, it was quite eye opening into what we should be pushing towards here in the UK.
Oh, that's really interesting, actually. I didn't know that America is so much further ahead than the UK. I mean, In what ways, do you think they are further ahead, and how do you think the UK can kind of try and catch up?
I think probably mainly was because of that I lived more on the west coast, so obviously very very new, a lot of low rise buildings, ramps everywhere, accessible. Like you knew that I didn't have to call and ask if a restaurant was going to be accessible. It was just understood that it would be. So that was something that was a real shock. So in the UK, especially London, you know that you're going to face accessibility challenges on the tube, whereas everything that I encountered in America was really accessible. And whether that extends to other disabilities, I'm not sure, but I can only speak from sort of my experiences and as a wheelchair user.
Yeah, definitely. But no, that's really interesting and something I didn't actually know. I mean, obviously, with your work now being in architecture, do you think that having a disability has given you kind of a new perspective on architecture and how to make things more accessible?
Completely. I think obviously growing up with my mum being in a chair, I had those ideas already, but yeah, it's definitely sort of really resolved those ideas and sort of solidified them in a way that's one of the forethoughts of my design um, approach.
Yeah, definitely. That makes, complete sense. So, obviously you became involved in wheelchair rugby, but I was wondering, how were you sort of introduced to the sport?
So I was introduced to sport in hospital. Actually, one of my nurses, she was one of the team GB assistants at the time. She said that I might have the right physical attributes to be quite successful in the sport, and sort of said that I should get involved. And it probably wasn't for a couple of years later where I actually really took it up. I missed having sport in my life and wanted to get back to something, and that was something that I looked to explore more. I'm glad that I did.
Absolutely. And it's obviously it's been amazing that you did decide to go ahead with it. Do you think, I mean, had you heard of kind of much wheelchair accessible sport beforehand? Do you think you ever thought that when you realized you were going to be in a wheelchair that you wouldn't be able to do much sport?
Um, yeah, definitely had those ideas. I when I was in hospital, I was adamant that I was just gonna, like I said, get up and walk out, and I was gonna go back and play rugby with my uni team. I definitely didn't appreciate what the Paralympics was, in terms of what dedication, what hard work actually is. I thought it was more of a participation. It's good that they're having a go sort of thing, whereas actually getting involved in a Paralympic sport and realizing quickly that yeah, these spots on these teams aren't just given to you. You've really got to work for them.
Oh yeah, I mean you definitely have. I mean it's interesting what you say there that you were adamant that you were gonna one day sort of walk out of hospital and be able to do everything that you used to be able to do, like you say, play rugby with your uni team and everything like that. I mean, do you think, but obviously at some point, and I mean, I would imagine that I would imagine that's something you definitely did think because obviously, like I said, your life had a complete 180. But how long do you think it took for you to kind of accept that this was your life? You were going to be in a wheelchair, and what do you think helped you to accept that?
Um, I think just the time that I was in hospital, obviously you get the amount of time I spent there and just knowing that there probably wasn't going to be the progressions that I would have liked when I first got ill or had my disability, and the doctors were really good at explaining that and just sort of saying like, well, this is what we're going to do and this is what you got to work with, and I have an amazing family and sort of friend system around as well, but family especially as well that is like, well, you can drive on now and this is what it is. You can sort of make the most of it, or you can wallow in a bit of self pity, and I'm sort of the person that will just sort of drive on and get on with things rather than sit and mull and wonder what if.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think that's a really a really good attitude to have as well. So, what things do you kind of love about wheelchair rugby?
So to start with, when I first got involved in the sport, it was all about the crashes, the physical contact, the aggression of it. Something that being in a wheelchair, you just get, I guess, almost treated as if they need to be wrapped in cotton wool. You're a little bit fragile. Whereas that wheelchair rugby dispels all of those myths straight away. And that was really what drew me in. But what sort of kept me compete for such a long time, I guess, was the tactical nature of the sport, and really trying to outthink your opponents, and working on patterns, and trying to make it as perfect as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it really does sound like an incredible sport to take part in. But I mean, you achieved so much with the sport. I mean, I know that you rose up the ranks pretty quick. And like, that nurse said to you, you have really, the right physical attributes for it, which I imagine was one of the big reasons that you rose quite quickly. But I mean, one of the big things you achieved was winning gold at the Tokyo 2020 Paralympics. So, can you tell me about some of the experiences you've had playing wheelchair rugby, and, maybe some of your favorite moments that you had?
Yeah, I mean, favorite moment definitely would be the gold in Tokyo. It was such a shame that friends and family couldn't have been there with us, but then again, if they were, it might not have been quite the same end result. So you got to take your blessings when you can get them. I've been to some amazing places. I think the biggest thing that I owe my career progression was moving to America, and training with the Phoenix team. I had some great teammates and a great coach. They really sort of taught me how to play it as a team sport, whereas in the UK at the time, and Great Britain, were very much all focused on individual physical attributes, and trying to do things as individuals rather than really working as a team. And I like to think that was something that I brought back, and sort of really implemented with GB over the last sort of 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think really interesting that what you bring up there about learning to sort of work as a team. I mean, do you enjoy that kind of like shared camaraderie between all of your teammates?
Yeah, I think there's something really special about achieving something that's bigger than the sum of its individual parts, and that's the only thing you can sort of contribute it to. Obviously, I played team sports growing up, and knew that, yeah, you can't do things all by yourself. You have to have a team around you, and that's really important. Being able to lean on them, and then being able to lean on you, and that was what really sort of drew me as well to wheelchair rugby, is that team environment.
Yeah, I can completely understand why. And it's one of the things I love to bring up with my guests, and I brought up a lot there, is, what you kind of just said about that you have to have people around you. And I get that. I guess that applies not just in sport, but in life as well. Outside of a sports field, you've kind of, if you can, got to have that team around you to support you. But, kind of going back to sport, I guess it feels great that you're all kind of working together to achieve that sort of shared goal as well.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely helped in other aspects of life. I think the most successful people I know either played sport as a kid, or were involved in sport in later life, so that they have that ability to be able to work with people really well, and sort of get the best out of those around them. And I see it works well in my day-to-day life now, in architecture, project management, and getting people to sort of buy into what we're trying to achieve, and pushing the project forward. So yeah, there's definitely takeaways, and I think sport is a really important thing, especially for children.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you say that, sort of teamwork is one of the big benefits of sport, but what would you say are some of the other benefits?
Um, Obviously, the physical and health benefits just speak for themselves. I think if you and that's why I think my school was so good at making all the students get involved in sport from a very early age, and right the way through school, is sort of getting that health benefits, but also challenging yourself, not just in the classroom, but on the sports pitches, on the running tracks and swimming pool, and all of that sort of stuff. I think being able to challenge yourself or put yourself through a bit of torment, a bit of hurt, physically and mentally, I think is a good thing. I think tough times build tough characters.
Yeah, do you think it makes you a more resilient person as well then?
I think so. As long as you're challenging yourself in all the aspects, then I think it definitely will make you a stronger person.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned that sport is, really beneficial, especially for children. I mean, how do you think, do you think that getting children into sport at, a pretty young age is really important? And how do you think are sort of good ways to get children interested in sport?
First, it has to be fun. I think that's the number one thing that you're not going to get buy-in, and you're not going to get sort of engagement if it's not fun. And that's the number one thing that sport should be. It should be fun. We do these things because we like doing them. And I think that's the number one thing to get kids involved. And I don't think I think a wide variety of sports is not just trying to sort of pigeonhole Tiger Woods in or the next Tiger Woods very early on. It's trying to just get on a well-rounded sporting background. I think is really good, and you can sort of then decide which ones take your fancy and sort of try and progress them if that's what takes your fancy.
Yeah, 100%. So you're now retired from the sport, but you've been undertaking some commentating recently at the Paris Paralympics. So what have those experiences been like, kind of stepping off the rugby field and commentating on it instead?
Uh, Really interesting. I've done a couple of the commentating gigs now, and it's amazing to see just how quickly sport moves on, and that's quite hard to say because I like to think that if I got in my rugby chair, I'd still be able to mix it a little bit, but that definitely wouldn't be a case. I know how hard those guys train and how hard they work, and just to see the level keep going up and up every year that I watch it is really fantastic. And to be part of the Channel 4 broadcast team that was over in Paris was brilliant. I mean, it's quite cool to see a games from completely the other side. Obviously, having done two as an athlete, so seeing it from on the outside looking in was really interesting and quite nice as well. Not having the pressure of being at a games, just being able there to enjoy, relax and enjoy it and soak up the atmosphere.
Yes, I can totally imagine. It would be quite nice to, yeah, not have so much pressure on you and actually being able to appreciate everything that's going on around you and how special the Paralympics is without being, without competing for your country. But that's something I want to get onto as well. How did you actually get the opportunity to make it onto the GB team? And, how did you feel at your first Paralympic Games? Because that's a really big step in someone's life, I think.
Yeah, getting onto the GB team. Obviously, I came through the development pathway with GB. I had a year in the development team. There were quite a few retirees after the London 2012 Paralympics, which allowed me to progress into the elite team. Probably too early. If I look back at it now, I don't think I was deserving of an elite GB spot, but because of the lack of other people available, then it sort of fell on me a little bit, which has helped, I guess. But yeah, going to my first Paralympics in Rio was absolutely amazing. Obviously, we had Zika that time as well, so I don't think I'd gone to a games where there wasn't a virus going around or something. But no, it was amazing. My sister came out to watch, and she was blown away by all the support and all the messages we got from back home, and it was just like an awe-inspiring event because obviously playing in a sport, we're so isolated. We do our sport, we go to world championships for our sport, European championships, where you go to a Paralympics and suddenly you're at this multi-event games where there are thousands and thousands of other athletes, and you see all sorts of disabilities that you never even knew existed, and just amazing eye-opening experience to see how people cope as well.
Yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine how incredible that experience would have been. And I think it's such an amazing thing to be able to say that you took part in. I mean, obviously retiring from wheelchair rugby would have been a really big decision. Do you ever miss it?
No. I was ready to retire probably 2 years before the Paralympic Games. I knew that my body was starting to sort of feel the bumps, feel the bruises a little bit more. Uh, I get real enjoyment from learning new things, and I didn't feel like I was learning all that much in wheelchair rugby anymore. So I felt it was getting a little bit stagnant for me, but I'm glad that I persisted. I'm glad that I didn't stop when the games were postponed a year. Yeah, it was sort of a nice way to end it.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of like a sort of grand finale type thing. I think that I can imagine that that was a really sort of satisfying conclusion for you. So what would you say then has been your proudest moment so far?
Um, Definitely the Tokyo gold medal was as a sporting achievement was brilliant. Getting to go to get my MBE with my dad at Windsor Castle from Prince William was also right up there as a really proud achievement that I've got now, and a really nice memory.
Absolutely. I mean, I got to dive into the MBE because I mean, that is incredible. I mean, you've done so many incredible things, but MBE is a real like once in a lifetime thing. I mean, how did it feel when you sort of found out you were receiving one, and then obviously, what were you feeling on the day when you got it?
Um, yeah, just really proud when I got it. But obviously, when we found out we were getting it, that was quite a shock. But at the same time, it was then we had to keep it quiet for probably 3 months before anyone knew, which was quite exciting as well because I was with family and they all sort of found out on the same night. Obviously, when the New Year's honours list came out, which was really nice seeing their faces and on all the sort of congratulations that came with it. It was obviously an extra from winning the gold medal, but a really nice thing that we do in the UK, and I'm very proud to be a recipient of one.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, yeah. I bet that, watching all your family find out would have been an absolutely amazing thing to witness. But was it difficult to keep it a secret? Did you want to tell people?
Yeah, absolutely wanted to tell people. I think with the way that the last few Paralympics had gone, I think if you had won a medal, then I think it was sort of assumed that you might be getting on the honours list, but obviously you'd never want to assume something like that. So it was perhaps on the cards, but it was a really cool thing to get.
Oh yeah, definitely. So looking ahead then, do you have any sort of goals or aspirations for the future? And if so, what are they?
So I'm still quite competitive, so I've taken up clay pigeon shooting competitively. Uh, and it's really nice to be a beginner again and learning something new and having those frustrations of not being able to do it right or get it perfect as I'd like to. So yeah, that I'm currently doing that. Obviously, I've got aspirations in my professional life in work and sort of developing that aspect of my life as well. So yeah, no, I've got plenty going on.
Wow, it definitely sounds like it. The learning something new thing though, I do want to delve into because that you have mentioned that you really enjoy learning new skills. What is it about learning new things that you enjoy? Is it the fact that you're not going to be able to get it perfect first time, or is it, just the fact that you're trying something new? What is it that you enjoy about that?
I think it is that learning experience and being able to develop new skills, new techniques, new coping strategies, or just trying to figure something out. And if it doesn't work perfect first timers, then right back to the drawing board. What do I need to do to sort of get the result that I want to? So yeah, I think it's the whole learning process for me that really makes it worthwhile.
Right, okay. Yeah, no, I can definitely see why that would be something you'd enjoy. Well, I mean, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I mean, it's you're such an incredible person, and I think you've, achieved so many things, in sport and outside of. And I really love, like, one of the things I've definitely taken away through our conversation is how resilient you are, and I think that's something I really admire about you. So thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to talk to me. It's been really lovely meeting you, and I've really appreciated you coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you again, and thank you to my audience for listening, and I will see you all next time.